Hey guys, this is my first opening video here on Rook 2d2. If you hadn't had a chance, please check out introduction videos. In this video, I want to give you guys an intro to how to play against the King's Indian defense. Here I will only be covering the first 9 moves leading up to the variation we will be looking at, which is 9 bishop g5. The point of this is for you guys to understand every move leading into this line. That being said, this video is mostly for beginners, so if you are an advanced player, you can move right ahead to the next video, where we will look at some detailed analysis of this variation. Before I start, I want to briefly explain how I look at each move based off of the theory of consequences and threats. Every chess move has a consequence, and these consequences must be realized in order for you to develop a strong plan during your game. Consequences can be good or bad. They could be something like, I weaken my e5 square to I develop my knight. Now, threats are anything that you find detrimental to your position if your opponent is able to execute it. For example, if your opponent is attacking your queen with his pawn and threatening to win your queen, that is a threat. Or if your opponent is threatening to win the bishop pair. Basically, if you use these consequences and threats, looking at them after every move in your chess game, it won't only help you understand what your opponent is trying to accomplish, it'll also help you avoid your opponent's threats. Alright, so now that I've explained that, let's begin. So we're going to look at the King's Indian defense variation, the main line, and we're going to deviate at move 9 with bishop g5 instead of main line with something like 9b4 or 9 rook e1. Okay, so 1d4, consequence of d4. We're putting a pawn in the center, we're controlling the e5 square, and we're opening our dark squared bishop. Black now plays knight f6, developing his knight, and having control over some key central squares. White now plays c4, gaining more control over the center and gaining more space in the center. Black now plays g6 with the idea of fianchettoing his bishop along the h8 a1 diagonal. White now plays knight c3, developing his knight, controlling the e4 square. You could even say white is threatening to play e4, gaining more space in the center. Black plays bishop g7. White plays e4, putting another pawn in the center, gaining more control over the d5 square. And now black plays d6. Now this is the pawn structure of the King's Indian defense. The main thing I want to note here is the King's Indian defense is a hypermodern opening. And what that means is black is going to give white the center and give him lots of space in hopes to counterattack that and create some weaknesses into white's camp. So that's very important to realize throughout this whole entire variation, because that's the main theme behind all of this. White now plays knight f3, developing his knight. Black castles. Now white plays bishop b2, following mainline King's Indian defense, developing his bishop, preparing to castle. And now black plays e5. Now this is a key move. Any pawn pushes are always key moves that need to be looked at. One thing I want you guys to realize here is if you look at his pawn structure, look at the c7, d6, e5 pawn structure, you'll notice they're all on dark squares. So by definition, black's dark squared bishop on g7 is a bad bishop since the central pawns are in the same colored as it. Another thing to note here is now black is putting more pressure on white's center, specifically the d4 square. So now white castles, and black continues putting pressure on the d4 square with knight c6, developing his knight. And now to follow the main line, white plays d5. Consequence of this move, again it's a pawn push, we want to look at this. We now lose control over the c5 and e5 squares, and now we close the center. Now what this means is that both sides will start playing on the wings. So white will play on the queen side. For all you beginners out there, the easiest way to tell which side of the board you want to play on in a closed center is where your pawns point. You can see how white's pawns are pointing towards the queen side and black's are pointing towards the king side. So white will be attacking on the queen side and black will be attacking on the king side. So consequence of this move closes up the center, no more tension in the center. Threat, we're threatening to take the knight on c6, so black must do something about that with his next move. Another thing to note is look at our pawn structure. Now our pawns here are on light squares, so our light squared bishop is now a bad piece. So black now plays knight to e7. As we said, we were threatening to take the knight on c6, so he moves away. One key thing to note here is, as you can see, his knight on e7 has no squares to move. And that's a key thing to realize, because in this variation several times this knight becomes a very bad piece because it has nowhere to move. So as of right now, black has a bad dark squared bishop and a bad knight on e7, and we have a bad bishop on e2. So now we get to the line we will be looking at, which is 9 bishop g5. Consequences of this move: we weaken the b2 square, we develop our bishop with possibilities of taking on f6. So I want to give you guys a brief introduction into the idea behind 9 bishop g5. The idea is, if this knight stays on f6, which the main line that black plays is 9h6, if we will take this knight on f6, bishop takes, and what this will give us, we will be giving up the bishop pair, which is not a big deal since this is a closed position. But what this will give us is it's going to give us an advantage of time. With this bishop, after we take on f6, bishop takes f6. With his bishop on f6, it's going to take him a few extra moves to move this bishop back and begin his kingside attack with f5. And that's something we will take advantage of by starting our attack immediately on the queen side with things such as b4, c5, knight d2, knight c4. One piece of information I want to tell you guys about 9 bishop g5 is Joe Gallagher's book. It's an everyman book. It's called Play the King's Indian Defense. He mentions this line as a sideline and says that this is a very underrated line, and says it's a very venomous line. And that's the best way I can describe it, is this is a very venomous line, because a lot of times in King's Indian Defense, black wants to play f5, f4, and then begin his attack with h6, g5, h5, g5. However, in this line, black is unable to do that, because in the lines I will be showing you, if he starts to attack with f4, you can immobilize his entire attack with the g5, his attack with g5, h5 ideas. And that's why I love this variation, because a lot of people, if they don't understand what to do against bishop g5, they go with their basics of, I'll play f5, f4, and start attacking. But in this variation, white has an absolute clear advantage, and I can attest to that, and we'll see that in the later videos. So that's the main things I want you guys to see here. Moving ahead, is the main idea behind bishop g5 is we're going to start an attack gaining some time on the queen side, and it's a very underrated line that your opponent will not understand the ideas of how to play against this. So from here, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you haven't had a chance, please subscribe, list any comments below, and I hope you guys will check out my next video. Alright, thanks.